Now to other issues. In 2023, non-oil export generated just about $4.8 billion, with raw commodities like cocoa, cashew, sesame accounting for 80%. Nigeria exported 280,000 tons of cocoa that year, 2023, at about $1,000 per ton, generating about $1.1 billion. However, processed cocoa, processing into chocolate, butter, powder, could sell for up to about 5,000 per ton. Cote d'Ivoire shows us how that's done. They process 33% of cocoa and they earn over 3.8 billion from their exports. Now, the Raw Materials Research and Development Council, the bill, is supposed to bring Nigeria to that path. But of course, there are voices that have said that path may not be that straightforward. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, Dr. Muda Yusuf, right here in the studio to share his thoughts on this. Dr. Yusuf, good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Ini. Thank you.
Yeah, so we got that your release, and you're not in favor of this bill that is compelling exporters to add at least 30% value to any raw materials before exporting it. So could you tell us why? Because on the surface, it does seem like if we add value, we make more money.
Yes. On the face of it, it's a very good policy. And there's a whole lot of benefits in local value addition. But the process has to be very strategic. It has to be very inclusive. And it has to be done in a way that you don't penalize any particular segment of the economy to support the other. Now, when we are talking about a proposal to ban the exports of raw materials, unless you add minimum of 30%, local value addition. The challenge is that this kind of policies needs to be contextualized within the capacity to process. There's also the challenge of generalization. For some of those raw materials, perhaps you have some local capacity to process up to that 30%. But for some of them, we don't have any. So this thing has to vary from product to product. It also has to vary according to the capacity to process. Take, for instance, if you talk about wood and the furniture industry, we have a very robust furniture industry in this country. If you say that we should not export raw wood, that is fine, because you have the capacity. But if you take things like cashew nuts, sesame seed, ginger, and all of these things...
About cocoa?
Cocoa, we have some fair capacity as well. But again, we need to look at the capacity vis-a-vis the production, because when we are talking about the economic policy, you need to also worry about all the key stakeholders involved. There are people involved in the exporting of the raw materials. They're also creating jobs. They have a very long value chain. There are people in processing. The whole idea is to ensure that every player in the economy benefits from it. There's also the issue of competitiveness of those who are in processing. Because the issue of processing in the economy is not so much about the availability of raw materials. It is more about the prohibitive cost of production. How competitive will you be even if you process it? So these things are very critical. You know what production is here. You know what the cost of energy is, what the cost of fund is,
so for
the
you
cost
now,
of logistics.
What should the law look like? What should the proposed law look like?
The point is that this is a trade policy issue. And normally, these things rest within the domain of fiscal policy. You don't go and legislate fiscal policy. It's just like these tariffs. You don't legislate tariffs. You don't legislate bans. It is in the realm of regulation. From time to time, that is why every year we have this Finance Act, where tariffs are varied, where items are adjusted, where some items are put under import prohibition and things like that, depending on capacity. So for a trade policy, the framework has to be flexible. But once you make it a law, it becomes inflexible. And you cannot calibrate as the condition demands. So it's not a legislative issue. We already have a whole lot of things. I mean, how did the capacity of cement, how did it grow to what it is today? It's not necessarily about banning. It's about, gradual policy process, increasing tariff and all of that. Now we are where we are today. If you say that nobody should import cement, nobody will lose any sleep about it. Look at where we are now with refining. If you come up with a policy now that there should be no more importation of petroleum products, we are good. So we need to watch it. We need to be very strategic. We need to have facts. Because this things has to be evidence-based. You need to have a very robust study of the capacity to process. When you talk about many of these people are SMEs. Their own is to aggregate, get these things. They don't have the capacity on their own to aggregate and go and process. So there must be investors ready to take up the market, to do the off-taking. So it requires a very inclusive process.
So it sounds to me like the proposal on banning the solar panels also, because we did get someone who is into renewable energy, and they are not happy if the government would ban solar, but the government is saying that they want to build domestic capacity. So perhaps what you're saying is, can they make the environment, you know, maybe conducive enough for those SMEs to be involved in adding value before the bill or the law comes?
That is what it should be. And we also need to worry about policy sequencing and policy coordination. This thing is coming from the Raw Material Research and Development Council. And to start with, the core mandate of that agency is raw material research. It's not for you to come with proposals as to what to ban, what not to. It's raw materials research and development. And in any case, anything that has to do with trade policy, the finance ministry, which is in charge of fiscal policy, has to be firmly on board. The Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment has to be firmly on board. The Ministry of National Plan has to be on board. And in this particular case, the Nigeria Export Promotion Council is not even being carried along.
So maybe the raw material development or research and development, maybe they find that the raw materials they're supposed to use is being exported, and perhaps that's their concern.
It is their own to do research. You go to industries, look at their raw materials, see how you can improve on the raw materials they are using, see how you can come up with innovative research on alternatives to bring down their costs. That is the core mandate of that council. But again, just as I said, in principle, it is fine to add value. But we should avoid generalization. We should avoid policies that will upset other investors in other segments of the economy. And we should make policy very, very inclusive.
So, I mean, what you're saying now is this should not even be with the lawmakers, because it shouldn't be a law. It should be a regulatory policy based on products by products and capacity.
Capacity to process. That is what it should be. So and normally, that is the way trade policies are calibrated. You can see the way Trump is throwing about tariffs here and there.
Can we not go to President Trump? Because this morning I have another story and all that.
You know, that flexibility must be there. Of course, the finance ministry and the trade and investment ministry, you know, they will take a holistic look at the entire economy. They make the right kind of consultation before they take steps along those regulatory procedures. That is the way it should be. We don't want an environment where an agency of government will just stand up, go to the National Assembly, begin to propose bills that has far-reaching implications without due consultation, without carrying along some critical arms of government that should be part of it.
So what do you think should be done now? Because from what I hear, they've done public hearing, they've gone, you know, a bit further in getting this bill into law. Where can, I know we are having this conversation now, how can we, you know, bring this other perspective into the conversation? Well,
what we are discussing now is bringing it, you know, that perspective. I'm sure some of them are listening. And some of the stakeholders are also preparing to make presentations to the National Assembly. Some of the agencies of government are also consulted, although they are not coming up publicly. They're also making their reservations known to the appropriate authorities. But clearly, this is not a bill that should go forward. You know, it requires a lot more, you know, more rigorous thinking, evidence, research, and study. And it is, again, not even a legislative issue. It's a regulatory issue. You don't have to go to National Assembly to be legislative. I mean, where are you going to start from? And apart from that, you are going to lay another set of hurdles. If you want to export now, how do you determine 30%? You have to go to raw material research. They will test it and all of that. You know, how do you go about all those things? And each bottleneck you create for businesses within the bureaucracy. It's additional burden. It's additional vulnerability for corruption. So we don't want too many of these things in place. But more importantly, is to ensure that we do the first things first. We appreciate sequencing. We build capacity to produce competitively. Because we are talking about export. Export is about competitiveness. It's not just about you producing. How can you compete with other countries that are coming to the global market? That is the starting point.
So how do you propose that the policy look like? Finding a balance, because you've also agreed that there's a need in some sectors or with some commodities for something like that to compel, you know, that value is added before it's exported. But in some other commodities, we may not have that capacity yet. So how should a policy look like that can get a balance into all of this?
The policy should be sequenced in a way that you will provide incentives and support first for those in production, so that they are in a position to perform the role of off-takers competitively from those who are producing the primary products. That is very key. If you develop their capacity, and we know what production is in this environment, so that capacity must be there. The incentives must be there, so that they are able to off-take these primary products. If you say we should not even export primary, what of crude oil that we have been exporting? What capacity did we have? Until recently, what refining capacity did we have? So should we now say that we should not export crude oil until you add 30% value? You can see how challenging the policy can be. So it requires a much deeper study, you know, so that you take the right kind of steps and you involve the right kind of people, and you ensure the right kind of sequence. More importantly, is to build capacity, support production, support industrialization, give them the right kind of funding, provide energy, logistics. These are things that you need to put in place. Otherwise, even if you succeed in adding the value, you will not be able to sell the product.
Because of competition?
Because of competition.
All right.
These are issues.
All right, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises. Thank you so much. And, well, hopefully they are listening and we'll get response to some of these conversations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.